We are now starting a different section of biology in which we will be looking at organisms, and we will start from the prokaryotic, the most simplest cell or organism, and then go on to the next complex and eventually end with the animal kingdom. So let's first get some of the words cleared up in our vocabulary. The word prokaryotic literally means a cell that has no kernel. Just like on a corn, you have something that is hard inside, and that is signified to a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus. So if you were to draw a cell that was prokaryotic, you would see a membrane outside, but you really would not see anything inside the within the microscope. You would see small substances, but no true, with the word we use is no true membrane bound structure or an organelle. So they do not have an organelle. They're very small, highly distributed in very diverse organisms. By this we mean that they will be found in many different shapes and different diverse population. These cells, since they don't have a nucleus, so the genetic material, which is the chromosome, is present as a nucleoid. So by nucleoid I mean is that some part of the cell will have a cluster of this nucleoid region that would be like a free-floating chromosome. And sometimes they have a single chromosome, and sometimes they can be in a circular form. They will most likely have a cell wall, and the cell wall is there for its protection. So not just the plasma membrane, it has a wall, it has a capsule or a wall around it, so it prevents the cell from by getting degraded from the environment. They always reproduce by a prokaryotic or asexual means of reproduction, which is, for example, a cell can, if this was a cell, then the cell can form a pinch like a balloon and divide into two cells. Or it could do what is the yeast cell does, and which is like the budding, and it just produces new cells. So all of these means are mainly asexual, which means there's no sexual mating around present in these cells. These cells can be autotrophs. Auto means self, so they produce their own food. So these would be cells that have a chloroplast in them. So we're not really talking about plants yet, but the chloroplast, which is a pigment which helps the cell to form, to make its own glucose, can be present in these cells. They may have, actually, I shouldn't really use the word chloroplast, I should use the word chlorophyll, because the reason I changed it, because chloroplast is an organelle, it doesn't really have an organelle. And the other kinds of cells could be heterotrophs. Hetero means that are different. They depend on their food sources. Now these cells, I'm going to clean up this thing. It looks like a big mess I made over here. Now these cells can be either present in three different shapes. The one that are circular and round are called as the coccus. Plural is cocci. The one that are rod shaped are the bacillus. So these are all singular. And these names are plural, bacilli, and the last one is spiral or spirillum. And just as the name tells you, it is spirally shaped and twisted shape. The structure of a prokaryote is very simple. It almost looks like a capsule over here. You can see it's like a capsule, and it has a coating on the top. The coating is the cell wall, and sometimes outside the cell wall there is a capsule. So and prokaryotic cells who have a capsule are actually more resistant. And for example, the bacteria that causes pneumonia has this capsule, and that's why it's very resistant to certain antibiotics. And even if one bacterial cell survives, it can multiply and give rise to another population. They also have flagella. If you recall, flagellas are for here, it's mainly for locomotion, so it helps the cell, the prokaryotic cell, to move. And another thing that they have are called as pili or pilus, which is sort of like if I was to draw up a cell, and during conjugation or reproduction, it actually produces a sort of like a corridor, and then it merges to the other cell. And this is a way by which the nuclear material from one cell can go into the other cell. And these are called as the pili, or more like a transfer gate between airlines when you go from one terminal to the other. Okay. We already did this side. Okay. Now, how do these cells reproduce then? Because they don't really have reproductive organs. The primary mean is fission. Fission means splitting on two. So here's a cell, it's dividing into 2 and 4 and so forth. And it has a single circular chromosome, but when it divides into 2, both parts are being separated. Think of it as if you have 2 rings. If I have 2 rings or 2 bangles or 2 strings, and you start separating and pulling one ring on one side and one ring on the other, that's the way that these 2 cords are separated. They have a horizontal gene transfer, that is from one gene to one cell to the other, because they will exactly transfer the same genetic material. There's no mixing of it. And conjugation is a process by which conjugation is the picture that I showed you again earlier, when you have the pilus or the pili, and you transfer the genetic material which from one cell to the other. Now, the word plasmid is referred to those chromosomal regions that are circular within the bacteria. So bacteria have this unique kind of chromosomal material, which is plasmid, and it's almost like a photocopying machine. It just makes copies and copies and copies of itself. Okay, so what are these prokaryotes? These prokaryotes are mainly bacteria, as you may have noticed. I've been using the term bacteria a couple of times, and not all bacteria are disease causing. Only about 15% of them are disease causing, and the ones that cause disease are called as pathogens. There are lots of good bacteria that are present, whether in our cell, whether in our digestive tract, or in our mucus or saliva, or the intestinal region. So there are lots of good bacteria, and usually sometimes you get sick when you have an imbalance of the good bacteria. Because they change the pH of cellular components. So there are lots of good bacteria. Now, only those that cause disease, for example, if you were to cut a chicken and you use this knife to cut the chicken with, and then you went ahead and did not clean the knife and went ahead and cut an apple, you're going to have some contamination. The best way to get rid of them is to soak it in bleach. And particularly, you need just a 10%. I usually keep a 10% solution of bleach in my kitchen, where it's just take 10 volume and 90 volume of water and squirt it on the container and leave it for about 15 minutes. That's the best way to get it killed. If you just took a quick swipe and just don't leave it, it doesn't really get effective to kill them. Now, the bacteria are so humongous that they have their own domain. And within this domain, there are all kinds of different kinds of bacteria. Gram-positive, green sulfur, spirochetes are wavy looking. Green sulfur, as the name tells you, are bacteria that have green chlorophyll in them, and they also have sulfur. Gram-positive and gram-negative, I'll give it to you a little bit later. There are also some of the bacteria were considered to be mitochondria and chloroplast. Now, we did earlier the eukaryotic cell, and we talked about mitochondria and chloroplast earlier. These two were considered to be bacteria once upon a time, and they were engulfed by the eukaryotic cell. And the Proteobacteria are the starting bacteria, and chlamydia are also another kind of bacteria that cause certain sexual diseases, and cyanobacteria that have cyan or pigment, which are red in color. So there are all kinds of bacteria that we can see. A very, very diverse kingdom. Here are some pictures of the cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are the ones that are autotrophs. Remember, the word auto means self, so they have pigments in them and they can form their own food. They were the first ones to actually inhabit the universe or the earth. Over the time, in the early era of the planet, we had very little oxygen at that time, and there was more carbon, more of the other gases. Cyanobacteria actually were the ones that because of photosynthesis, they were able to release oxygen, and this oxygen, once it reached a significant amount, led to other organisms to survive, which are the aerobic organisms. And chloroplast was once upon a time considered to be a bacteria, and it was engulfed by a eukaryotic by the process of endosymbiosis. Endo means inside, and symbiosis is actually eating up. So there's a cell, and if there was a bacteria here of the chloroplast, it was actually engulfed this around this of the cell and eventually became part of the cell. So that's what the term endosymbiosis means. Here's another kind of bacterial kingdom, and these are called as the Proteobacteria, and they're very diverse. They are divided into two main classes, gram-positive and gram-negative. If you've ever been to the doctor's office and you've shown signs of symptoms, usually they will either treat you with gram-positive or gram-negative drugs that will kill one or the other, or sometimes they give a generic broad spectrum. When we use the word broad spectrum, generally the physician is giving you a drug that will kill both gram-positive and gram-negative. So next time when you go to the doctor's office and they give you something, ask for this word. You know, show that you've done biology and you know some of these vocabulary words that I've shown you. So those are the cyanobacteria, and cyanobacteria are also pathogens, that is, they're disease causing. They can be autotrophs or heterotrophs. Remember, auto means self, hetero-dependent, and they can be free living. So pretty much it's all kinds of bacterial population in here. Now, what are gram-positive bacteria, which is a kind of the proteobacteria that we talked about earlier? Gram-positive bacteria have a very, very heavy, thick cell wall, and because they have a thick cell wall, they're very resistant, very hard to kill. So usually heating and boiling and some strong disinfectants are needed to get rid of them, and they cause definitely diseases, and chlamydia are examples of gram-positive bacteria. Even if you get a strep, that's also a gram-positive bacteria. So streptococcus, or the common term that you get is when you have a culture and they do a culture on your throat and they say you've got a strep throat, that's a gram-positive bacteria. Spirochetes are those bacteria that are spiral looking, and these are also pathogens. They sometimes live on their own, or they can live on your host. So, for example, a ringworm, that the ring over here on the skin, and this over here are all examples of different spirochetes that have been infected. Okay, I want to give you another word that you should know, and that is the archaeas. Archaeas are prokaryotes, but they are not totally bacteria. They are actually given their own domain now. They have been taken out of the domain bacteria, and they are the most primitive cells on Earth. They are the cells that were present when we had extreme conditions. For example, in the earlier environment, we had lots of salt, heavy salt conditions, very high temperature. Thermophils are high temperatures, and methanogens are those that make methane because there was no oxygen at that time. So these are the cells that are prokaryotic, but they are present in their own domain, and these are called as the archaeas. By comparison of their structure and function, they are placed in their own domain. But interestingly enough, they resemble the eukaryotes more than the bacteria. They're very diverse, as I said, and they're very widely distributed. So, for example, in very hot sulfur springs or volcanic regions, you will see they are present in such extreme climates. Okay, so that concludes our talk on the bacteria, and we will next start with the viruses. So I'm going to stop my lecture here, and then we can start with the viruses later on.